14, it's called a piece of clothing. But I want to take you back to the original meaning of the subject that we're about to study, and it happens in Matthew chapter 27. Matthew chapter 27, verse 39 is where we will begin. I want to give you a running start at verse 39. It would have been a morning much like this. In the Middle East, it's very arid. The air is very light. And at nighttime, it tends to be very cool. Not a lot of humidity in the air to keep the temperature stable. And so many times you see that the temperature falls at night. Becomes very crisp. And so it would have been a morning much like this. Very crisp and very cool. Jesus was praying in the Garden of Gethsemane. Would have been there with his disciples, and we understand that Judas betrayed him. Jesus was arrested, and he was railroaded through 6 different trials there in Jerusalem. And finally, they convicted him as guilty. We understand that Jesus went through a lot of torture on that day, and we have to ask ourselves why. Why would Jesus allow himself to be arrested? Why would Jesus allow the 70 Sanhedrin to punch him in the face and to ridicule him? Why would Jesus allow the Romans to impale him with a crown of thorns and mock him as the King of the Jews while they placed a purple robe around him? Why would he allow them to beat him with a staff? Why would he allow the Romans to tie him to the whipping post and to strip the flesh from his back? Why would he stand before his own people as Pilate tried to release him, and they said, "Release Barabbas, but crucify him, crucify Jesus of Nazareth"? Why would Jesus choose the hard road? Why would Jesus not give up and say, "Father, destroy them. It's not worth it"? And we understand it's because of Christ's great love for us. Because Jesus wanted to bring you into his eternal kingdom. That's what kept him going. And as we look back at the story of Christ, we understood as he drug his cross outside the gates of Jerusalem, and as he drug the wood along the limestone path, he was thinking of us. He was thinking of the future glory that we would share with him, and how that he would bring many children into the kingdom. And so as we see in verse 27, Jesus has been nailed to the cross, and he is hanging there. It's somewhere between 9 and 12 noon in verse 39, Matthew 27, verse 39. And those who passed by blasphemed him. They cursed him, see, wagging their heads. You know that arrogant head shake, shaking the finger, wagging the head. Verse 40, and saying, "You who destroyed the temple and built it in 3 days, and rebuild it in 3 days, save yourself. If you are the Son of God, come down from the cross." Oh, how easy it would have been for Jesus to vaporize these people, for a black pile of ash to be where they stood. That's what would have happened if you were on the cross. But the great love of Christ looked down and saw this man, these people who blasphemed him, and he recognized that not too many days afterwards that Peter would preach the great sermon at Pentecost, and many of these men would be convicted that Jesus was the Messiah. We understand that 3,000 Jews on that day understood because of the things that happened at the crucifixion. And that Jesus came out of the grave, and they were convicted and they were converted. These very men that stood there and ridiculed Christ on that day. So why did Jesus not vaporize them? Why did He not turn them into a pile of ash? His great love for us. Verse 41, likewise the chief priest and also mocking with the scribes and the elders said, He saved others. He saved others. Himself He cannot save. If He is the King of Israel, let Him now come down from the cross and we will believe Him. Jesus performed many miracles before these men. He had made the blind to see. No one in all of the history of the human race had ever made the blind from birth to see again. Jesus performed this miracle right before them. They witnessed the man born blind now could see. Jesus made the lame to walk. Jesus had even brought back from the dead Lazarus before these men, and they rejected His messiahship. And now here they mock Him. And they say, let Him come down from the cross and we will finally believe Him. It's funny how Jesus was on the cross to save them from their very sins. They didn't recognize He was staying there for them. The great hypocrisy. Verse 43, He trusted God. Let Him deliver him now, if He will have him. For He said, I am the Son of God. Even the robbers who were crucified with Him reviled Him with the same thing. Then we see in verse 45 that darkness fell over all the land. That's at 12 noon. And the ninth hour, Jesus cried out with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani? That is, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? We understand Jesus was silent until this time, and finally He screamed out in agony. We understood that He was suffering under the penalty of the sins of the world. Jesus was being judged for sins, and He cried out. Finally, we see that in verse 50, the sin debt had been paid, and we understand in the Gospel of John that Jesus cried out at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Tetelestai, it is finished. Finished in the past with results that go on forever. Jesus had completed the work of salvation. And in verse 50, Jesus cried out again with a loud voice and yielded up His spirit. He died a supernatural physical death. He dismissed His own spirit from His body. Then we see three different miracles that happened on that day. Then behold, the veil of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The veil was there to separate God and man, and we understand Jesus now, through his sacrificial work, had brought God to man. He had dissolved the barrier. The earth quaked, and the rocks were split in two. The third miracle here, the graves were opened, and many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. This was a resuscitation. Believers that had died before, they were resuscitated. And it says, and coming out of the graves after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. These people were resuscitated, and they were resuscitated to tell about Christ, about how the Messiah had come and died upon the cross, and now he has brought man to God. Verse 54, so when the centurion and those with him who were guarding Jesus saw the earthquake and the things that happened, they feared greatly, saying, truly this was the Son of God. Isn't it amazing? The centurions had literally crucified tens of thousands of people. And when they saw the events that took place on that day, the logical conclusion, the centurion was trained to think logically. The logical conclusion was, truly, this was the Son of God. So that what I wanted you to see this morning was Jesus formed the very basis for what true love is. And this morning we're about to look at the subject of Christian love. Turn over to Colossians 3:14 now. Colossians 3:14. We've been looking at some new man clothing. We've been looking at the characteristics of super grace. We've seen, we're working on a list of 14 characteristics of a great congregation. And in verse 14, we see another piece of new man clothing that we are supposed to put on in our Christian way of life. But above all these, this means the most important piece of clothing that you will wear as a Christian, put on love, agape, which is the bond of perfection. So we look at, I want to go back and look at a few things. The word agape is a Greek word for love. We know there's three different words, Greek words for love. The first is eros. It's a sexual love. It's where we get the English erotic. That's not in view here. The second form of love is phileo love, another Greek word for love. And phileo love is a compatibility love. It's a friendship love. It's you and I get along, so I love you. That's not in view here. What we have here is the word agape. And agape love is a different kind of love. It is a virtue love. It is a non-emotional love. It's not puppy love like I call it. Young people are, they say they love one another, and it's because they're physically attracted to one another. And so we call that a puppy type love. It's not puppy love. It's not even a sappy type of love. Some people believe this type of Christian love is when you hug someone and you squeeze them really tight. And you say to yourself, I can't believe they hug me like that. They don't even know me. Well, that's not agape love. Agape love is more mechanical than it is emotional. And so we're going to look at agape love this morning. And what we need to do is we need to search the Scriptures to find a description of what love is, because this is the most important piece of clothing that we will put on. But above all these things, put on agape love, which is the bond. The word for bond here is desmos, and it means a link. It was originally used for a bond, something that held something together, like you would use it for handcuffs. Desmos, it holds the hands together. You would use it for a link, like if you're going to have two pulling horses, they're going to be in front of the wagon. You put that link between them so they'd pull together. It was also used for joints that hold the bones together. Here in this idea, we want to use the idea of a piece of clothing. And so desmos was also used as a girdle. And if you see the Roman military men, many times they wore a thick leather girdle around their midship. And it held not only their belt up, that they had all their battle gear on, but it held their breastplate in place and their shoulder pads and things like this. And so we see here, this is a piece of clothing that the new man will wear, and it will hold all the others together. So it's a most important article of clothing. And the word perfection is teleios, and it's a word for spiritual maturity. It's not that we become perfect as Christians, it's that we grow up to be more and more like Christ. And the word for teleios means that we've broken into maturity. So let's look at some of the aspects of Christian love. Turn back over to 1 Corinthians chapter 13. We want to see agape love in action. We've got to look at this passage. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. You know this as the love chapter. Paul here in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, he is going to take two issues. He's going to take the distortion of spiritual gifts and virtue love, agape love, and he is going to show the difference. And he says, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I have become a sounding brass or a clanking cymbal. And so we see here this letter was written in 57 A.D. The spiritual gift of tongues was still operational. We understand that tongues ceased at 70 A.D. And any use of the spiritual gift of tongues after 70 A.D. is actually a distortion, because it ceased to operate after 70 A.D. And you say, well, I've spoken in tongues. It was a distortion of the true gift. And so we see here that tongues were still operational in the local churches. You may ask yourself, well, why did they speak in tongues before 70 A.D.? It was a warning to the Jews of the impending doom of the fifth cycle of discipline. In other words, Jews from other countries were to come into Israel, and they were born with a native tongue out here, whether it be from Africa or somewhere in Europe. And they were in Israel, and they spoke Hebrew there. Well, someone with the gift of tongues, when they had a local congregation, would stand up and evangelize in the service. and they would tell about how Jesus Christ was the Christ. He was the Messiah. And they would speak it in this Jew's native tongue way off from Africa, way off from Europe. This was the language he was raised with. And in Isaiah 28:11, that was supposed to set off an alarm in his head. Because in Isaiah 28:11 it says, with a babbling tongue, with a stammering lip, you will be evangelized right before you go out of the land. And so he was evangelized in his native tongue, and he responded to the gospel, and it was a warning of the impending doom of the fifth cycle of discipline. Let me tell you what happened. Believers distorted the gift, even as they do today. And they would stand up and they would just like to make noise. And they were calling attention to themselves. Look what it says right here. A sounding brass. That's kalkos ekon. Do you know what that means? That was the same brass that the sales cart rang as he went through the villages. He had a cart and he was pushing. He had eggs and flour and sugar and butter. He had cinnamon, all that good stuff on there. And he was going to sell it. He was into capitalism. He had invested in a business. But how did he let people know that he was coming down their street? It's kind of like the ice cream truck. They play that loud, horrible music on there. Well, he had the symbol that he had the brass that he hung on his cart, and he'd bang it, and he'd say, sugar, butter, flour, I'm coming. Well, these people were distorting their spiritual gifts, and they were saying, look at me, look what I've got to sell. I'm taking away from the teaching that's going on up there, but listen to what I've got in my cart. The cart was empty. What happens to a cart that's empty when you roll it along the rocks? It's loud, isn't it? The second description was a clanging cymbal, a lazon. And this symbol was used by mourners that were hired to make noise in a funeral procession. In other words, they're going to bury someone, and these guys had a fake mourning process that they used, and they clanged, and they all cried out, and they cried, and they mourned for the one who had died. Verse 2, and though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And so he's comparing the virtue of agape love to spiritual gifts. These gifts have ceased to exist since 96 AD. Verse 3, and though I bestow all my goods, this is humanitarianism, it's human good, to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, a martyr complex, but have not love, virtue love, agape love, it profits me nothing. It'll burn at the bema seat, it's human good. Verse 4, what does love look like? Agape love emanating from the spiritual man, what does it look like? Love suffers long. Remember the characteristics? Macrothumia. It has staying power. It perseveres. You got that? Love has staying power, perseverance, patience, and is kind. Chrestotes. We've seen that one already. Love does not envy. See, it's freed from mental attitude sins like envy, jealousy. Love does not parade itself. You see, that's not arrogant. It's not look at me, calling attention to self. It's not puffed up, fat-headed, fusio, pumped up. Verse 5, love does not behave rudely. You got that? It's got manners. Young people, love has manners. You know, if you're a nervous type of guy like I used to be, I was a nervous child. This kept me very quiet because I knew the more I spoke, the more I got in trouble. And I learned to shut up. And if I shut up, no one knew what I was thinking. I could be thinking about doing something very wrong, and no one would know about it, as long as I was quiet. Do you know what? Manners will get you through a situation where you don't know how to handle yourself. You may enter a situation where you don't understand how to behave. Manners will get you through. Manners will get you through. You don't know a young lady. Guess what? You open the door for her. Manners got you through a relationship which you didn't know the other person. You don't know an older lady. You say yes, ma'am, to her. Now you've gained her respect. You got that? You use your manners. Manners will get you through a situation where you don't know how to handle yourself. And love here has manners. It's not rude. Does not behave rudely. Does not seek its own. Young people, you need to get out of the self-life. You need to be asking yourself, what can I do for this person? How can I serve others somehow? See, this is a foreign concept to most young people. It's always service to self. And so love can think objectively. It's not subjective. Does not seek its own. Is not provoked. I'm going to tell you, a lot of people are going to try to rile you up now. A lot of people are going to try to get you agitated. We live in a world now where if you're pro-gun, if you're pro-Bible, if you're pro-Israel, if you're pro-Constitution, pro-freedom, someone's going to be against you. You got that? And people are going to try to provoke you, instigate a fight. Guess what your agape love does? Allows you to stay calm, cool, and collected and say, you've got the freedom to think otherwise, but you don't have the freedom to take away my mind. I'm going to think in the realm of freedom, of truth. It's not provoked. Thinks no evil. Evil is Satan's plan, Satan's agenda, Satan's method of operation. It thinks no distortion, see. Does not rejoice in iniquity. I'm going to tell you what. Don't laugh at cussing. You got that? These comedians use all these cuss words. Don't laugh at them. Don't rejoice in their iniquity. I've trained my children. Why are you laughing? Well, that person fell down. You're not supposed to laugh at that. The first reaction you ought to have, response you ought to have, is to help them up and ask if they're okay. You watch the movies now, there's a cuss word, there's about 3 or 4 cuss words in every sentence. That's how they use. They can't form a sentence without a cuss word. Don't laugh at that. It's right, isn't it? People you work with, right? Don't laugh at that. You look at them straight-faced. You don't have to say anything. And they ask you why you didn't laugh. You say this. You're simply piling sins up at the foot of the cross when you speak like that. That's where my Savior hanged to die for you. And you just told the truth. Don't rejoice in iniquity. when a wrong has been done. Even when your enemies are killed on the battlefield, you don't rejoice in that. But rejoices in the truth. I love that part. When the truth comes out, bears all things. That means the pressures, the adversities do not bring it down. Believes all things. It keeps faith. Hopes. That means it have a confidence, assurance in all things. Endures all things. It means it has staying power. Verse 8, love never fails. That means it'll continue to be the first virtue throughout the church age. But whether they are prophecies, that is a spiritual gift that ceased at 96 AD, they will fail. They did fail at 96 AD. Whether there are tongues, a spiritual gift, ceased at 70 AD, they will cease. See, they've already ceased. Where there is knowledge, spiritual gift, ceased in 96 AD, it will vanish away. And so Paul here, he contrasts the spiritual gifts that were being distorted in the local church to agape love. I'm going to stop right there. Sorry about that. Say it again. We need to repeat that one. Agape love is a relaxed mental attitude, as in 1 Peter 4:8, and above all things have fervent love for one another, for love will cover a multitude of sins. And Mike says I need to repeat that because love will go a long way in marriage, and agape love is the issue. Relaxed mental attitude, and do you know why? Because people have a tendency to get flared up. People have a tendency to get flared up. And so you got two marriage partners, and you see that one of them is fixing to get flared up, and here you are over here, and this is your mate. And you see, you love them right now. You love them with a personal love because you see them and they're your right man or right woman, and there they are, and God made them for you, and we're just getting along great, and we've got all this compatibility, but all of a sudden something has happened, and it's caused them to be agitated. And now you see you've got a switch in your soul that you have to make. You got this? And that switch is going from personal love over here, and you're going to have to be able to hit that switch as fast as possible and switch it right over here to virtue love, or the relaxed mental attitude of agape love. Because what's going to happen is that when they get flared up, if you follow them, it's like, you ever seen those movies where they start initializing nuclear warfare? And, you know, you got to have the thumbprint here, and it's got to look in your retina here, and then you got to punch in the code here. Well, that's where you're headed. Because this thing is going to erupt, and you're going to have a meltdown, fusion. And so someone has to defuse the bomb. And the diffuser is the switch in the soul where you switch from a personal love to an impersonal love, and that impersonal love has a relaxed mental attitude where you never raise your voice. And you say, I know, darling. And you say, I apologize. What can I do to make it right? And you know what happens later on? She comes back and says, I'm sorry for being so upset. I was just having a bad day. Or the man does. Okay, it's not always the woman's fault. She's not always the one to get flared up. And so the relaxed mental attitude of agape love, in marriage, I would say this is the most important thing that we have to learn, is the switch in the soul, to be able to switch from personal love, where we have a true adoration and affection for one another, to a relaxed mental attitude. And do you know what this keeps you from doing? It keeps you from becoming bitter toward your spouse. It keeps you from going sour on your right man or right woman. And so we understand it's a relaxed mental attitude. And it covers a multitude of sins now, because now you're no longer hateful, bitter, vindictive. You're not going to get them back. Agape love is a true freedom for another's volition. In other words, you're going to give them the ability to live their own life. This is your friends out there who are mixed up. You give them the freedom to make mistakes in their own life. So this frees you up from the controlling type of attitude where you've got to control and try to manipulate everyone in your periphery. It solves the problem of legalism. You see, if I didn't understand this principle as a pastor, every time you missed church, I would be on the phone interrogating you and asking you where you were and why weren't you there, and telling you what you missed and things like this. Well, agape love gives freedom for another's volition. And they have the ability to choose when and where they go to church at, and not be under manipulation because of it. Freedom. The third aspect that I like to emphasize of agape love, it is a true virtue type love. In other words, it's dependent on the virtue and the soul of the one who has it. So you can love someone who is completely antagonistic towards you. So you get into a predicament in the Walmart parking lot, and you you took someone's parking place and you didn't even know it, and now they're antagonistic towards you. And you can continue to love that person for who you are, not because of who they are. And it's virtue in one's own soul. And so virtue loved is dependent on the character of the one issuing the love and not the recipient. Not because of they deserve it, but because of who you are. So we can obviously say through these descriptions, that this is not a human type love that is on the street. It's not dependent on attraction. It's not frail. It's not weak. And so this agape type love is what kept Christ on the cross. You got that? He loved that Pharisee that was down there telling him, get down from that cross if you're the Son of God. Jesus had the relaxed mental attitude, and he thought to himself, yes, but I'm staying here for you. And so this brings us to our next segment. We want to kind of summarize with some verses here. I want you to write down Romans 5:8. This is the motivating factor. This is the pattern, This is our pattern for agape love. Romans 5:8. But God demonstrates His own love toward us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And so the first point under our summary is that God loved us while we were yet sinners. Our whole program was antagonistic towards His essence. Not only did we have a sin nature, it contaminated every cell of our human body. We were born into spiritual death when God imputed Adam's original sin. But also, after we lived, we committed personal sins in three categories. Mental attitude sins, sins of the tongue, and overt sins. And so we were totally antagonistic towards God's essence. We were revolting to God, in other words. But God, in His great mercy and grace, He loved us, the Bible says, while we were still sinners. And He sent Jesus Christ to the cross to die for our sins. And so there is a pattern here in agape love. We love like God loves, according to the same pattern. And those who receive our love are not worthy. They are not, they have no attraction. So God set the pattern. The second point of summary is 1 John 4:19. We have an initial motivating factor. First John 4:19. Because He first loved us. We love Him because He first loved us. And so, in the Christian way of life, we become born again, but then we begin to find out exactly what God has done for us. How that we were wayward and not worthy of anything, but how God gave and gave and gave so that we could become the children of God. And so now we have the initial motivating factor. We have a response to God's love for us and His sacrifices that He has made for us. So the initial motivating factor in agape love is we love Him because He first loved us. The third point I want you to remember under agape love as we study today and we summarize that this is an important piece of clothing that we wear as church-age believers. We put on this clothing by pulling the truth out of our right lobes and we place it on the launching pad where we make application to life. It's a piece of clothing we have to put on every day. We get up in the morning, we put on our agape love, and we walk out the door as royalty, representing Christ in His absence. Now, as a believer, every day you walk on earth, you'll have to put this clothing on. You'll wear it as your uniform. Just as the soldier, the Roman soldier, would never go into battle without his gear. And all that gear hinged upon his girdle, his harness that he wore. And so agape love is the harness, the girdle that holds all of your equipment on. Now, in phase 2, the super grace believer wears this uniform. He wears the uniform of agape love. But one day, we're going to trade that uniform in. I want you to turn over to Revelation chapter 2. Revelation chapter 2. I want you to notice that revelation is in the singular, not in the plural. A lot of people like to say revelations. That's incorrect to the utmost because the word is apocalypsis. It means unveiling. Revelation unveils Jesus Christ. He is the apocalypsis. Singular. Revelation chapter 2. What we're going to see here is the churches of Asia Minor, and Jesus Christ is going to promise some rewards to him who overcomes. The first thing you need to know is this part of Revelation was written to born-again believers, not unbelievers, but actual churches. In Revelation chapter 2, verse 7, Jesus Christ is saying to John, John is having a vision on the Isle of Patmos. He says, "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches." There it is, born-again believers. To him who overcomes, that is, makes it to maturity. The overcomer here is another word for super grace. He overcomes the world, the flesh, the devil. I will give to eat from the tree of life was in the midst of the paradise of God. And so this is a reward that is given to the super grace believer from Jesus Christ at the Bema seat. This is a reward. And so the first reward is a member of the Paradise Club forever. You probably want to write that in your notes if you don't have it already. I've got it written in my Bible. So the believer who makes it to super grace, maintains that status, will become a member of the Paradise Club forever. Now, the first thing you notice here is, what? We're not all equal in heaven? We're not. N-O-T, not. Equality is a satanic myth. As long as there is freedom, there will never be equality. And you're free to grow up in Christ, or you're free to stagnate. And those who grow up and overcome will be given this reward. They'll become a member of the Paradise Club forever. They'll have access to the garden of God. Here in the garden of God, they will have fellowship with other super grace believers. They will have access to the gazebo in the garden of God. The second reward is mentioned in chapter 2, verse 10. Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. Did you know that Islam looks like it's going to be the religion of the tribulation? We thought 30 or 40 years ago it was going to be Catholicism. But if the rapture happens today, it'll obviously be Islam. Well, guess what Islam loves to do? Torture. Kill. Do not fear any of those things which you are about to suffer. These are born-again believers. Indeed, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison that you may be tested, and that you will have tribulation 10 days. Be faithful until death. These believers are going to die until death, and I will give you the crown of life. And so the second reward is eligibility for crowns. In other words, the believer becomes eligible for the crowns. There's 3 crowns. Here is mentioned the crown of life. The crown of life is given to those who pass momentum testing in life. In other words, you've passed the 8 areas of testing, momentum testing. The second crown is the crown of righteousness, dikaiosune. Those who develop capacity from Bible doctrine will be given this crown. The third crown available is the crown of glory. The crown of glory is the soul winner's crown, but it's also the crown that grows to maturity. In other words, this is a crown given to pastors who grow their congregations up to maturity. This is the crown given to grandmothers who teach their grandchildren and cause them to grow spiritually. This is the crown given to parents who teach their children spiritual truth and cause them to grow up. And so the crown of life, the crown of righteousness, and the crown of glory, that's the second reward available to super grace believers. Look at chapter 2, verse 17. The third reward of super grace. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, breaks into super grace status, I will give some of the hidden manna to eat, and I will give him a white stone and on the stone a new name written, which no one knows except him who receives it. And so the third reward is a special gift. A special gift. The manna in the Bible, as relates to fellowship with God. And then we see here a stone sometime was given as a gift. We see here Jesus Christ is going to give you a nickname right here written on this. And I suppose my nickname is going to be something like rambunctious, rowdy. Probably something like you were an irritator. Man, you were obnoxious. This will be, it's going to be something funny. You're going to look at it and say, ha! You figure you knew me better than anybody else, and Jesus Christ does know you better than anyone else. Let's look at verse 26, the fourth reward for the super grace believer. Chapter 2, verse 26, and he who overcomes breaks into super grace and stays there and keeps my works until the end. I will give power over the nations. And so the fourth reward is rules in the millennium. We will rule with Christ in the millennium. So when Jesus Christ sets up his perfect kingdom on earth for 1,000 years, he is going to give rulership to super grace believers. The reversionistic believer is going to be plowing on the back 40. The super grace believer is going to be plantation manager. I'm sure I'm going to be working for my wife. I'll probably be cleaning out the latrine, something like that. This one, Jesus says, he who is last will be first, right here. Verse 28, the fifth reward for super grace. And I will give him the morning star. The fifth gift. This is a new and eternal chivalry. The fifth gift of super grace. The morning star is a new and eternal order of chivalry, where Jesus Christ himself will place the believer in knighthood forever. The sixth reward of super grace, we're going to have to go to Revelation chapter 3. Look at verse 4. Remember I told you that you're going to have to take off that uniform of agape love and put on a new uniform? You have a few names, even in Sardis, who have not defiled their garments. They haven't accepted false teaching. And they shall walk with me in white. So the sixth reward to the super grace believer is the uniform of glory. The uniform of glory. Jesus modeled this uniform on the Mount of Transfiguration. The uniform of glory is a piece of clothing that you wear over your resurrection body. So let me give you some points here. Every believer at the rapture will receive a resurrection body. That resurrection body is going to be you at 33 years old. You say, how do you know that? Because our body will be like his, and his was 33. Think about it, that's the prime of life anyway. So that we receive our resurrection body. There will be millions and millions and millions of believers in heaven. All with eternal salvation. But I'm going to tell you what, God's got a lot of wayward children. A lot of wayward children. You know some of them, so do I. I used to be one. Wayward children. They never got enough truth to get stabilized. They're going to be there. They'll be there with their resurrection body, and they'll be minus their reward. They're not going to have any of these rewards. They'll get to see them. They're not going to get to wear them. And so this new uniform, the uniform of glory, will be placed over the resurrection body. It is a robe of translucent light, a shimmering piece of clothing worn over the resurrection body. So let's look at the seventh reward in verse 5. He who overcomes shall be clothed in white garments, and I will not blot out his name from the book of life, but I will confess his name before my Father and before his angels. And so the seventh reward is special recognition, where Jesus Christ calls out the name of the super grace believer before God the Father and the holy angels. This is an honor roll, if you will. You ever been put on the honor roll? This is the honor roll in heaven. What about the eighth reward? Look at verse 12. He who overcomes, this is he who apprehends and maintains super grace status. I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go out no more, and I will write on him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the New Jerusalem. And so we see here that the super grace believer is going to have a pillar erected in his name. This pillar is going to be erected in the Hall of Records, the new and eternal Jerusalem, the satellite city that floats above the earth. And as in ancient times, the heroes, the stories of their life, the stories of their valor was chiseled into a pillar. And it went around and around the pillar, and it started at the bottom and it went to the top. In the Hall of Records, you and Resurrection Body will be able to go through the building and see each pillar that was erected to the Super Grace believer's life. And you will be able to read right here, this person had cancer and they endured this suffering to the end. Right here, this person faced enormous persecution, and yet they stayed faithful. And as we saw Wednesday night, Daniel's going to have a pillar there, and it's going to say, and Daniel was cast into the den of lions, and yet he trusted God, and he was delivered from the lion's mouth. Verse 21 is the 9th reward to Super Grace. To him who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne, as I overcame and sat down on my Father's throne. And so the 9th reward is delegated authority. Well, whoever told you it was going to be equal in heaven was terribly wrong. God rewards your spiritual advance. Half the Christians out here are trying to stay saved. They have no idea the aorist tense of sozo. They can never get on to studying rewards. So God rewards your spiritual advance. Now, what I wanted you to see here is, it's Sunday morning. We're going to get back to the grind tomorrow. You're going to go back to your job, back to the normalcies of life, back to everyday living. You're going to put on your pants in the morning. You're going to get dressed. You're going to put your socks on if you can find them. You're going to pull your boots up. But don't forget your uniform of agape love. Don't forget to put on the uniform of agape love. And when you stand before Christ, on that day, on the Bema seat, the judgment day, Jesus Christ is going to say to you, give me that old worn out piece of clothing you got. Give me that old jacket you put on every day. Give me that piece of your uniform because I've got a new one for you. It's the uniform of glory. You're going to wear it all of eternity. And it's going to point to my grace. And it's going to glorify me forever. So there's my challenge for you this morning is put on agape love and don't take it off, and remind yourself that one day Jesus Christ will reward those who wear that uniform.